Hello everyone, I hope you're having a wonderful day. Today we follow Toan and Tu Diem through a fragile night where love must stand firm against exhaustion, uncertainty and broken memories. As Toan struggles to rebuild a life he can barely remember, will Tu Diem's patience be enough to hold them together? If you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next episodes. The morning light was pale. The small hut in the middle of the field opened quietly, like an old wooden box finally placed where it belonged. Toan stepped inside first. His voice was low and warm, echoing softly in the space that still carried the damp scent of earth from the night before. He paused for a moment and looked around. New blankets, sheets, and pillows were neatly stacked in one corner. Everything was clean and carefully arranged. No one needed to explain. Thu's mother and Thu had prepared everything. They left no message and said nothing. They simply did what needed to be done as a silent way of acknowledging that the two of them were ready to stay here. Tu Diem entered after him. She glanced around the hut and gave a very faint smile. She spread the mat on the floor with both hands. Every movement was slow and careful, as if she wanted to stretch this rare moment of calm just a little longer. Toan and Tu Diem opened each bag together. The soft rustle of fabric filled the small space, mixing with the breeze slipping through the wooden door cracks. When the warm-colored sheet was pulled flat across the bed, Toan reached out and touched it. The fabric was soft. The sensation eased something inside him. His memories were still fragmented, but at least in that moment he did not feel empty. Tu Diem looked up. Their eyes met. No words were spoken. The look alone was enough to show that both of them were trying to be patient with the present. Outside, the field stretched wide and bare, quiet and open. Everything was only just beginning. There was still so much work ahead. But in this moment, simply being together was enough to push away the morning chill and the loneliness that had followed them for so long. The air inside the hut felt lighter. The place no longer felt abandoned. They were building something fragile but real, one careful fold, one shared breath at a time. The afternoon passed slowly. Faded sunlight slipped through the wooden door cracks, laying a warm golden tone across the small room. Toan and Tu Diem stood beside the simple bed. They removed the old sheet and replaced it with a new one in the same color. Each crease was smoothed carefully, as if erasing traces that had been left behind. Tu Diem noticed that the red blanket looked like the one they used in their previous home. A memory surfaced briefly. She held it for a moment, then let it go. She did not want this moment to feel heavy. Toan watched her quietly. His gaze softened. He folded the spare blanket slowly and placed it in the corner. Every movement was steady, as if he were building a temporary sense of peace for both of them. When everything was in place, they sat down on the bed. The distance between them was no more than a single breath. The question of sleeping arrangements came up. Sharing the bed, or laying a mat on the floor. Tu Diem shook her head gently but firmly. She said he could sleep on the bed, and she would be fine sleeping underneath. Toan smiled, but he felt uneasy. He did not want her to give up comfort, even in the smallest way. In the end, they agreed to split the bed in half. In that instant, the small room seemed to open up. It was as if the world had shrunk, leaving only the two of them holding onto each other amid broken memories and uncertainty about tomorrow. No one spoke after that. The silence carried things that had not yet been said. but it was clear enough. The afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the field. Toan stood at the porch with a hoe in his hands. In front of him was an empty patch of land. Later, it would be dug and leveled to become a place for washing and bathing. Tu Diem stepped out behind him. In her mind, she was already listing what was still missing. She said she would go to the market first and told him to keep working. Toan nodded, but a quiet unease rose inside him. He did not want her to go alone, even if the market was nearby. He reminded her to be careful. Tu Diem smiled. Her eyes were warm enough to ease the fatigue on his face. Her figure slowly disappeared down the dirt path. Toan began digging. Each strike of the hoe rang clearly through the still air. The soil was hard and filled with stones. Sweat ran down his forehead and mixed with dust. He did not stop. There was a firm determination inside him. He wanted to build a stable place for both of them, even though his memories were still scattered. Tu Diem's presence did not allow him to give up. She was trying for him. He had to try for her. The dusty path led to the small market. Tu Diem walked beneath the slanted afternoon sun. Her heart felt lighter, though quiet concern remained. She stopped at the meat stall, asked the price, and chose carefully. Then she moved on to the vegetable stand and the general store. Each item went into her bag: toothpaste, face towels, seasoning, green vegetables. Every item was a small part of their new home. Back at the farm, the sound of a motorbike stopped in front of the hut. The electrician stepped down and said Thu's mother had asked him to install the electricity. Toan opened the door. When the light bulb turned on, warm yellow light spread through the space. Dark corners disappeared. The wires were secured and the switches were fixed in place. Toan stood still, watching the light. Inside him, a few blurred fragments of memory felt slightly clearer, even if only a little. When the electrician left, Tu Diem returned. The bags were heavy on her shoulders. She noticed the light, then looked at Toan. No words were exchanged. A single glance was enough. Electricity did not only bring convenience, it showed that a new life was slowly taking root. Dusk settled in. The field turned a deep red. The light remained, slipping through every crack, the same way hope finds its way through long days. The sun had fully set, leaving the sky a deep, muted purple. The field around the hut slowly disappeared into shadow, while the newly installed light inside continued to glow steadily. Tu Diem returned with the bag still heavy on her shoulders. She stopped for a moment when she saw Toan working, carefully leveling the ground. His movements were slow but deliberate, as if each stroke carried a purpose beyond the task itself. They did not say much. A brief look passed between them, enough to understand that there was still work to be done. Toan took the bags from her hands and spoke in a steady voice, telling her to put the things away while he kept going. Tu Diem nodded. She placed the items inside the hut quickly, then came back out without hesitation. She picked up the hoe and joined him. They worked side by side. They dug, leveled the ground, and shaped the drainage ditch. The sound of metal striking soil echoed into the evening. The earth was stubborn, stones scraped against the blade, sweat soaked through their clothes, clinging to their skin as the night air grew cooler. Neither of them complained. Toan paused occasionally to wipe his forehead, his eyes flicking toward Tu Diem with concern. He told her to rest if she was tired. She shook her head and gave a small smile, saying she was fine. They cut bamboo and carried it back together. They set up a simple water trough and poured cement for the base, their hands moving with careful coordination. Every action felt like a quiet agreement. They would turn this place into a home together. Under the faint moonlight, their shadows stretched long across the damp ground. They looked uneven and awkward, like two puzzle pieces still trying to fit after being separated for too long. Toan felt the exhaustion deep in his bones. His arms ached and his breathing had grown heavier. But beneath the fatigue, there was a different kind of strength. Tu Diem was not just helping with the work, she was helping him stay grounded. Her presence kept him from drifting back into the emptiness left by his broken memories. In that dark field, they were no longer two people struggling separately. They were moving forward together against the darkness, against the uncertainty that still lay ahead. Night settled in fully. The only light came from the warm yellow bulb inside the hut. It spilled through the doorway, cutting a narrow path across the ground. Toan and Tu Diem moved inside to prepare dinner. They gathered dry bamboo and started the fire. The bamboo crackled and popped as the flames caught, sending thin smoke drifting upward. Toan used the knife to chop more bamboo for the stove. Tu Diem washed vegetables and sliced the meat with practiced movements. They worked in quiet rhythm, passing each other tools without needing to ask. When the water began to boil and the scent of cooking meat filled the air, they shared a brief smile. It was small, but it carried relief. Toan brought in a wooden plank and placed it across two bricks to make a simple table. He told her to sit down and let him finish. Tu Diem shook her head and kept working, saying it would be faster if they did it together. In that moment, surrounded by smoke, firelight, and the dim glow of the bulb, they were no longer two people adjusting to a new life. They felt like a small family, preparing their first meal in this place. Toan felt the strain in every muscle, but there was a quiet sense of comfort watching Tu Diem move around the stove. She was not just cooking food, she was creating a sense of normalcy, trying to stitch his fractured memories back together through routine and care. When the rice was done, steam rose into the cool night air. Toan scooped the rice into bowls while Tu Diem arranged the dishes on the table. They moved slowly, deliberately, as if neither of them wanted to rush through this moment. Outside, the wind swept across the field, cold and sharp. Inside the hut, the warmth from the fire and the steady presence of each other pushed the cold away. This was more than a meal. It was a small act of rebuilding, carried out piece by piece in the middle of uncertainty. They sat facing each other at the makeshift table. The gentle clink of spoons against bowls echoed softly in the quiet night. They ate slowly. Each bite carried warmth, not just from the food, but from the care that had gone into preparing it. Toan looked at Tu Diem and spoke quietly, saying it had been a long time since they last ate together like this. Tu Diem smiled faintly. Her eyes reflected the light as she listened, letting the silence answer for her. They began to talk about the future. They spoke about fixing the farm, planting vegetables and flowers, building a chicken coop, and harvesting enough to sell. They talked about repaying Thu's mother and Thu for their help. Toan's voice held both hope and restraint. He knew parts of his memory were still missing, but he said he would keep trying. Tu Diem listened without interrupting. She reached out and lightly touched his hand, telling him she would wait for him to recover. After the meal, they washed the dishes together in the cold water. Their hands were stiff from the temperature, and they kept reminding each other to be careful. When everything was put away, the night had grown deeper. The field outside was quiet, wrapped in darkness. They lay down on the bed and placed a pillow between them, creating a small boundary. Toan pulled the blanket over Tu Diem first, making sure she was warm. Then he drew her closer, sharing his warmth with her. In the darkness, their breathing slowly fell into rhythm. They spoke softly, expressing gratitude. Gratitude for the food, for the shelter, for each other. Tu Diem rested her head against his shoulder and whispered that she hoped he would remember soon. Toan gently stroked her hair. A strange mix of regret and hope rose in his chest. Regret for what had been lost. Hope for what still lay ahead. In that moment, fear loosened its grip. Wrapped in the quiet of the night and the warmth they shared, they felt a fragile sense of peace. The road ahead was still long, and uncertainty had not disappeared. But they were no longer walking it alone. The night closed around them, holding a promise that was delicate but strong enough to endure.
Trong tập này, Toan và Tu Diem bắt đầu những ngày đầu tiên ở căn chòi nhỏ giữa cánh đồng, nơi mọi thứ còn trống trải và thiếu thốn. Từ việc dọn dẹp, sắp xếp chỗ ngủ, đào đất, san nền cho đến bữa ăn đầu tiên, từng hành động đều thể hiện sự cố gắng, âm thầm của cả hai. Toan mang trong mình những mảnh ký ức rời rạc và nỗi lo chưa thể ổn định cuộc sống, trong khi Tu Diem lặng lẽ ở bên, kiên nhẫn và không đòi hỏi. Ánh đèn được thắp lên, bữa cơm giản dị được nấu giữa đêm lạnh, và những lời hứa về tương lai dần được nói ra. Dù con đường phía trước còn dài và đầy bất định, họ hiểu rằng chỉ cần còn có nhau, họ vẫn có thể tiếp tục bước đi.